Russian President Vladimir Putin held his annual televised news conference this morning. He spoke about escalating tensions with the U.S. over Moscow's military buildup at the Ukrainian border. Around 500 international and domestic journalists attended the event and asked questions about everything from Ukraine to Russia's fight against COVID-19. This comes days after Putin accused the U.S. and NATO of taking aggressive actions along Russia's border with Ukraine and threatened to use, quote, retaliatory military measures. Mary Ilyushina is in Moscow with more on the Putin's press conference today. Let's get right into it. What did Putin have to say in regard to this military buildup at the Ukrainian border and the West's involvement in that?
Yeah, that's right. Ukraine basically was the main topic of all the foreign policy questions here during this 4-hour marathon. He was asked straight up, can he guarantee that he's not going to invade Ukraine? And he didn't go as far as to say or to guarantee that. He said that if the Western action continues, which he sees as aggressive, at his doorstep, Russia's doorstep is what Putin believes Ukraine is, then Russia will have to respond one way or another. And he explained this buildup basically saying that they view what's happening in Ukraine and their willingness to join NATO as a threat to Russia. And he justifies this massing of troops in Russia, as we know, almost 100,000 troops on the Ukrainian border right now, as a means to secure Russia's interests and Russian global standing. So at first he said that, Russia is willing to talk with the U.S., but if the talks don't yield what Putin wants, the guarantees that he wants, he is not ruling out military action.
Mary, we learned earlier this week that a bilateral engagement would be taking place between the U.S. and Russia in January. What do you think it is that Putin wants?
Well, Putin wants essentially to restructure the whole hierarchy and the and the whole security architecture of Europe. He wants NATO not to expand eastward. He wants NATO to guarantee that it will never be in Ukraine or any other former Soviet republic, because he doesn't want to see Western military assets around his borders. And Russia sent U.S. diplomats a pretty sweeping list of demands last week, and there have been some communications between National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and his Russian counterparts. And Putin shared today that, as he said, days after New Year's, basically in early January, Russian and U.S. representatives are going to meet in Geneva to discuss those things. So some sort of more or less calming lines that came out from Putin today is that he is willing to talk and negotiate. And he said that so far U.S. response, in his view, has been positive and businesslike. But he wants legally binding guarantees. And he always repeats that, you can trust U.S. On these sort of legal documents, but nonetheless, he wants to pursue one. And he also accused NATO of breaking their promises, because he said Russia was promised multiple times. He said 5 times NATO was promised not to expand, and still expanded, and he wants that to stop.
And did he talk about the jailing of opposition leader Alexei Navalny at all today?
Yes, that came up. He once again refused to call him by his name. He refused to pronounce the name Alexei Navalny. He was very dismissive of the question about Navalny, because he said, he reiterated once again that Russia never got what he wanted from Germany, which is evidence that he was indeed poisoned by Novichok. And he said, let's close the page on that one, because we never heard anything that would allow Russia to open a criminal investigation. Obviously, there's been multiple evidence that Navalny was indeed poisoned, but Russian authorities still continue to dismiss that. And as we know, Navalny has been in prison for many months now, since the beginning of the year, and continues to serve his 2.5-year long sentence. And he's complaining about the conditions and the sort of treatment that he had in prison.
Putin was asked about Russia's low COVID-19 vaccination rate and high death toll. Do you have any more information about what he said regarding those rates there in the country?
Yeah, Russian authorities are currently trying to sort of change their attitude towards how to persuade Russians to get vaccinated and how to persuade them to treat coronavirus more seriously, to sort of cover up for their previous informational mistakes. Because from the beginning of the pandemic, Russian authorities were very dismissive of how serious coronavirus is. And now they're seeing that the really kind of low vaccination rates still continue here. And, we know that Russia was first to register the vaccine. But currently, the collective immunity here barely reached 60%, which is not what was in the government's plan. So Putin again said, urged Russians to get vaccinated, urged Russians to get revaccinated, to get booster shots. But he still acknowledged for the first time, but he's recently started to acknowledge there have been mistakes in the way the pandemic was handled, in the way that Russians have been informed how serious it is and that they should actually get vaccinated.
That's a bit unusual and very interesting. So Russia, like many other countries right now, is dealing with surging inflation. What did Putin have to say about this? And is there a concern that possible U.S. sanctions due to the Ukraine matter could make matters worse?
Yeah, Putin was asked about inflation, and he said that this year showed 88% inflation, and they were hoping for 4%. And they, see that there's a very big discrepancy between their initial plan. But he quickly pivoted to say that, in the U.S. it's worse, and that Russia is not doing so bad compared to many Western countries, which was quite surprising. In terms of sanctions, more and more Russians, just regular Russians, are becoming sort of concerned that, if there's going to be a new round of sanctions, that might target some very, very close to heart things like iPhones, because there's been media reports that U.S. is considering to ban certain imports to Russia, and that could affect, basic things like iPhones. And that's something that Russians were very, very sensitive about. And that's sort of the response to that has been so far the biggest sort of ordinary Russian reaction to potential war with Ukraine, potential repercussions that it might bring, that they, that very foreign policy issue can become really domestic really quickly, and they're worried about that.
Mary, thank you for breaking it all down for us. Take care out there.